It wasn't always like this. I remember when my apartment was just a place to sleep, not the prison it's become. I used to look forward to getting out of work, grabbing a quick bite, and zoning out in front of the TV or my computer. But somewhere along the way, things changed. It wasn't sudden, more like the slow decay of something you don't notice until it's too far gone. The wrappers piled up, the laundry stopped getting done, and I didn't really care. Now it feels like every corner of this place is sinking in on me. The walls, once a neutral shade of beige, now seem darker, dirtier, and they hum with a kind of emptiness that I can't escape. My life outside of these walls is no different. Every day, I shuffle through the same routine at the convenience store, ringing up cigarettes, beer, and lottery tickets for the same people, their faces blending into a monotonous blur. They talk to me sometimes, polite, meaningless conversations about the weather or the price of gas, but I barely register it. When I'm at the counter, I feel like I'm on autopilot. A smile here, a nod there, just enough to keep from drawing attention. It's easier that way, easier than explaining why I feel like a ghost of myself, like I'm drifting further from the person I used to be. My mom calls a lot. I know she's worried. She always asks if I'm eating enough, if I'm taking care of myself, and I tell her what she wants to hear. Yeah, Mom, I'm fine. Just busy, that's all. She doesn't need to know that the only thing I'm busy with is clicking through video after video on YouTube, mindlessly watching other people live their lives while mine passes me by. The truth is, I haven't felt fine in a long time. I avoid her calls more often than not, letting the phone ring until it stops. I don't know how to explain it to her, or to anyone, for that matter. This isn't something I can just snap out of. It's not something anyone can fix with a few phone calls. It's the nights that get to me the most. I sit in my apartment, lit only by the glow of my computer screen, watching Twitch streams or scrolling through forums. The online world is my refuge, my only connection to anything outside of this suffocating isolation. There's one streamer I've been following for a while now, someone who calls herself the Patient Gamer. She's got this goth vibe going on, and there's something about the way she talks that pulls me in. She plays old games mostly, the kind that no one really cares about anymore, but the way she talks about them, with this mix of nostalgia and darkness, makes it feel like she's talking directly to me. Sometimes I leave her streams running in the background, while I lose myself in other corners of the internet. It's easy to do. Hours pass, and I don't even realize it. Time has started to blur like that for me. Days bleed into nights, and before I know it, another week has gone by. My room has become a reflection of my mind. Cluttered, stagnant, with no way out. I've thought about cleaning it up, about making an effort to put things back in order, but the thought exhausts me. It's easier to just stay here, in this mess, and let it pile up around me. You've started noticing strange things lately, though. At first, it was little things, like messages popping up in my inbox from accounts I didn't recognize. Spam, I figured. It's the internet, after all. But these messages were different. They weren't just generic offers for free phones or miracle weight loss pills. These messages seemed personal. I remember one from an account called Chad Vibes 37 that said something like, "I see you." It was creepy, sure, but I brushed it off as a weird coincidence. People get hacked all the time, right? Nothing to worry about. Then the shadows started. I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes I'll catch something moving out of the corner of my eye. I'll turn, expecting to see a moth or a spider, but there's never anything there. The shadows are always just out of reach, flickering at the edges of my vision, disappearing the moment I try to focus on them. It's probably just my mind playing tricks on me. Too many late nights, too much time spent in front of a screen. But the feeling lingers. It's like something is watching me, waiting. I've told myself 100 times that it's nothing, that I'm just paranoid. But the more I try to ignore it, the worse it gets. I can't shake the feeling that whatever it is, it's getting closer, I've started keeping my curtains closed all the time, even during the day. The outside world feels too bright, too real, and I can't deal with it right now. It's safer in here, in the dim light of my apartment, where I can keep an eye on things. But even in here, I can't escape the creeping sense that something is wrong, that something is coming. I guess that's why I stay glued to my computer screen for hours on end. It's the only thing that distracts me from the growing unease. I lose myself in streams, forums, anywhere I can forget about the shadows for a while. But even online, things are starting to feel off. I've seen weird usernames popping up in chat rooms, names like Spam Host and Ethereal Deals. They post strange comments, offering things that make no sense. Unlimited peace for just one click, or trade your worst memories for eternal bliss. People joke about it, but every time I see one of those comments, I get this cold feeling in my chest. Like maybe it's not a joke. I know I should get out more, should talk to someone. But I don't. I can't. The outside world feels too far away now, too distant from where I am. I'm not sure if it's depression or something else, but the truth is, I don't care enough to figure it out. The only thing I can do is keep going, keep watching, and hope that whatever is lurking in the shadows stays there. Because if it doesn't, I'm not sure I'll be able to handle what comes next. That night, I was doing the same thing I always did, sitting in front of my computer, watching the Patient Gamer stream. It had become part of my routine. She was playing some old-school survival horror game, the kind with pixelated graphics and clunky controls. The chat was rolling with its usual mix of jokes, inside references, and random chatter. I wasn't really paying attention to any of it, though. I just had her stream running in the background while I mindlessly scrolled through YouTube and forums, half listening to her voice as it filled the silence of my apartment. It was comforting in a way. Her monotone, slightly sardonic commentary felt familiar, like the voice of an old friend. Even though we'd never spoken, I didn't chat in her streams. I didn't chat in anyone's streams. I was more of a lurker, just there to observe, to watch other people live their lives while mine sat stagnant. But then something changed. Out of nowhere, her voice cut off mid-sentence. The game froze on the screen, and for a few seconds, everything was still. I thought maybe her internet had gone out or my computer was lagging, but when I refreshed the page, the stream came back, except it wasn't the same. She wasn't playing the game anymore. Instead, she was staring directly at the camera, her eyes wide and unblinking, her face unnaturally still. The chat was going wild. People asking if she was okay, if this was some kind of weird prank. I leaned in closer, my heart pounding in my chest. There was something wrong. Her expression didn't look like an act, and the longer I stared at her, the more I realized that her face was starting to distort. Her mouth slowly stretched wider and wider, unnaturally so, until it seemed to take up half her face. And then, without warning, a loudspeaker, an actual loudspeaker, seemed to emerge from the center of her face. I froze. I didn't know what I was seeing, but it felt too real to be some kind of glitch. The loudspeaker buzzed with static, and then a voice, not hers, not anyone's, came through. It was a deep, metallic voice, like something out of an old horror movie, but what it said made my blood run cold. "Welcome to the information superhighway," it intoned, its words crackling through the speaker. "Here, there are rules. Break them, and you will face consequences." My hands trembled as I reached for the volume, lowering it as the voice continued. It talked about scammers, about the dangers of interacting with them, and laid out strange, cryptic instructions for how to survive in the digital age. "Do not engage with unsolicited offers," the voice said. "Do not click links from unknown sources. Follow the rules, or the highway will consume you." The words sent a chill down my spine, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. The chat had exploded with confusion. People asking if this was some kind of art piece, some elaborate ARG, but I knew in my gut that something was horribly wrong. The voice faded, the loudspeaker slowly retracting into her face, and just like that, she was back to normal, continuing her stream as if nothing had happened. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what I'd just seen. My heart was racing, and my mind was spinning with questions. What the hell had that been? Was it some kind of hack? A glitch? It didn't feel like either. I glanced at the chat again, and though people were still talking about it, most seemed to be brushing it off as some kind of performance art. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more. Something real. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself that I was overreacting, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me for the rest of the night. Even after I closed my browser and tried to distract myself with something else, the words from the loudspeaker echoed in my mind. Follow the rules, or the highway will consume you. It was ridiculous. A part of me wanted to laugh at how absurd it all was. But another part of me, the part that had been seeing shadows move in the corners of my apartment, the part that had been receiving strange spam messages, couldn't help but believe there was something more going on. I went to bed that night with a nagging feeling that I was being watched, though I couldn't say by what. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against my window, made me jump. I pulled the blankets over my head like a child, hoping that whatever it was would leave me alone if I couldn't see it. But sleep didn't come easy, and when it finally did, it was restless, filled with strange, fragmented dreams that I couldn't remember when I woke up. The next day, I tried to go about my usual routine. Work was the same, ringing up customers, nodding through their small talk, but I couldn't shake the lingering dread. Every time my phone buzzed with a new notification, my heart skipped a beat, half expecting another message from Chad Vibes 37 or one of the other spam accounts. And sure enough, it came. This time, the message was even stranger. Did you enjoy the show? It was signed with a winking emoji. I stared at the screen, my hands clammy. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore. Whoever, or whatever, was sending these messages knew what had happened during the stream. They knew I'd seen it. My first instinct was to delete the message, to block the account, but something stopped me. What if that was exactly what they wanted? I thought about the rules from the loudspeaker, about how it had warned me not to engage with unsolicited offers. Was this one of those offers? I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing. I left the message unread and went about my day, trying to ignore the gnawing sense of unease growing in the pit of my stomach. But it didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. The shadows in my apartment seemed darker, heavier, and every time I logged online, I felt like I was being pulled deeper into some twisted, inescapable web. The spam comments, the strange usernames, they all seemed to be following me now, popping up on every site I visited, even the ones that had nothing to do with streaming. By the time the sun set that night, I was a mess. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Was I going crazy? Had I imagined the whole thing? But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, the truth was, I felt like something was coming for me. Something dark. Something I couldn't escape. The first time he came, I thought I was dreaming. It was around 2 a.m, and I had just settled into bed, trying to forget about everything that had happened online. My mind was still racing, caught somewhere between fear and disbelief, but I told myself I needed sleep. Maybe that would help. But then came the knock. Soft at first, barely audible. I almost ignored it, thinking maybe it was a tree branch tapping against my window or the sound of the building settling. But then it came again, harder this time, more insistent. 3 steady knocks, like someone politely waiting for me to answer the door. I sat up in bed, my heart thudding in my chest. No one knocks on my door. Not at this hour. Not ever, really. My mind immediately went to the worst-case scenarios. Someone breaking in. Or maybe it was the police. Or worse, maybe it was something from the internet. Something that had crawled its way out of the screen and was standing just on the other side of my door, waiting for me to let it in. I stayed still for a few minutes, listening. The silence felt heavy, pressing in on me, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that someone, or something, was out there. Against my better judgment, I got out of bed. My legs felt shaky as I crept to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. I didn't have a peephole, but even if I did, I wasn't sure I'd want to look through it. Slowly, I cracked the door open, just enough to peek out. And there he was. A man stood in the hallway, illuminated by the dim light of the flickering bulb overhead. He was dressed in a suit that looked like it had seen better days, worn, frayed around the edges. But the thing that really got me was his face. He had this wide, frozen grin, like the kind you'd see on a ventriloquist dummy. His eyes were too wide, unblinking, and his lips were stretched unnaturally, as if they'd been glued in place. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, grinning at me like he knew something I didn't. My blood ran cold. "Good evening," he said finally, his voice unnaturally smooth, too calm for someone standing at a stranger's door in the middle of the night. "I'm here to conduct a survey." I didn't know how to respond. My brain felt like it had short-circuited, like I was stuck between laughing at the absurdity of it and slamming the door in his face. A survey? At 2 in the morning? Who does that? But the way he stood there, perfectly still except for his mouth, which seemed to twitch just slightly as he spoke, kept me rooted to the spot. I'm not interested," I finally managed to stammer out, trying to pull the door closed. But before I could, his hand shot out, gripping the edge of the doorframe. His fingers were long, too long, and pale. The grin never left his face. "Oh, but you haven't even heard the questions yet," he said, his tone still unnervingly pleasant. "It'll only take a moment of your time." Something inside me screamed to shut the door, to lock it, and never open it again, but I couldn't move. I was frozen there, caught in the pull of his gaze, trapped by that awful grin. He began rattling off questions, nonsensical things about my habits, whether I enjoyed certain types of online content, if I'd ever clicked on any strange links. Each question felt like it was peeling back layers of my life, like he knew things he shouldn't. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest, but all I could do was stand there, nodding along, too scared to make a move. After what felt like an eternity, he finally stepped back, releasing his grip on the door. His smile didn't waver. "Thank you for your time," he said. "We'll be in touch." And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the dark hallway. I stood there for a long time, staring after him, the door still half open. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew it wasn't over. The next day, I tried to pretend it hadn't happened. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But deep down, I knew it was real. The strange man, the survey, the way his smile never wavered. It was all too vivid to be a dream. I didn't go to work that day. I called in sick and spent most of the day in bed, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that the man wouldn't come back. But he did. Every night after that, the knocking would come. Always 3 knocks, always at the same time. And every night, he'd be there, waiting for me with that same frozen grin, asking more questions, each one more disturbing than the last. At first, I tried ignoring him, staying in bed with the covers pulled over my head like a child. But it didn't work. The knocking would go on until I finally gave in, opening the door to find him standing there, grinning, waiting. The questions became more personal, more invasive. He asked about my fears, about my regrets, about things I hadn't told anyone. It was like he was reading my mind, digging through the darkest parts of me and exposing them. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make him stop. I was losing it. I could feel myself slipping further and further into some kind of madness. The shadows in my apartment seemed darker, more solid, and I could swear I saw figures moving just at the edge of my vision. The spam messages kept coming too, more frequent, more sinister. Every notification made my skin crawl. It was like the world outside my door and the world inside my computer were merging, becoming one twisted reality that I couldn't escape. One night, After another round of questions, I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped. As soon as the man finished his survey and turned to leave, I grabbed the bat I kept by the door, the one I'd bought for self-defense, but had never actually used, and swung it at him with everything I had. I expected to hear the sickening crack of bone, to see him crumple to the ground. But instead, the bat passed right through him like he wasn't even there. And just like that, he vanished, leaving me standing there, breathless, clutching the bat like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. That was the moment I realized it didn't matter what I did. I couldn't fight this. Whatever was happening, whoever, or whatever, this man he wasn't going to stop. And I didn't know how much longer I could hold on before I lost myself completely. I didn't think I would actually leave. Even when I was packing my things, throwing random clothes into a bag, grabbing what little cash I had stashed away, I still didn't believe it was happening. But then there I was, standing in the middle of my apartment, the floor covered in trash and reminders of my failure to live a normal life. The air smelled stale, like fast food and desperation. The shadows that used to just haunt the edges of my vision now felt like they were crawling along the walls, reaching for me, eager to drag me back into whatever nightmare this had become. I couldn't stay here. I knew that much. After that last encounter with the strange man, the way he vanished like smoke after I swung the bat, it was clear to me that my apartment wasn't safe. Hell, I didn't think anywhere was safe anymore, but I couldn't breathe inside those four walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that, if I stayed, I'd become part of whatever darkness had taken root in that place. The spam ghosts, the weird messages, the shadows, they were all connected, all feeding off my isolation. If I didn't leave, I knew they'd consume me. So I walked out. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where I was going. I just kept walking, feeling the weight of the city close in on me as I moved farther away from the apartment. The streets were mostly empty, save for a few passing cars and the occasional stray cat darting between dumpsters. I wandered through alleys and side streets, keeping my head down, avoiding anyone who might ask what a guy like me was doing out in the middle of the night with a beat-up duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Eventually, I found myself down by the river. I don't know why I went there. Maybe it was because it was the farthest place I could think of from my apartment, from that cursed building. The riverbank was quiet, except for the gentle sound of water lapping against the shore. It smelled faintly of damp earth and decay, but there was something peaceful about it. Something that made me feel like maybe I could hide here, at least for a little while. I wasn't alone, though. As I walked along the bank, I spotted a man rummaging through a pile of scrap near an old, rusted shopping cart. He was thin, with a grizzled beard and a coat that looked like it had been dragged through the mud a few dozen times. He didn't seem to notice me at first, too busy sorting through his findings, but when I stepped on a twig, his head snapped up. For a second, I thought about turning back, disappearing into the night before he could ask any questions, but something about him made me stop. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, not with suspicion or curiosity, but with an understanding that cut through the silence. "You lost?" he asked, his voice rough like gravel. I didn't know how to answer that. Was I lost? In every way that mattered, yes. I wasn't even sure if I could explain what I was running from without sounding insane, so I just shook my head, hoping that would be enough. He gave me a long, considering look, then nodded slowly, like he understood more than I was saying. "Name's Ray," he said, gesturing to the makeshift camp he had set up a few yards away. "You can crash here if you want. Not much, but it's better than wandering around all night." I hesitated, but owned it for a moment. What choice did I have? I wasn't going back, and I had nowhere else to go. So I followed him to his camp, settling down near the fire he had built out of scrap wood and old newspapers. The warmth of the flames was the first real comfort I had felt in days. It was almost enough to make me forget about the things chasing me, the things lurking just behind the veil of reality. Ray didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. He seemed to sense that I wasn't ready to talk about whatever had brought me here. Instead, he talked about life on the streets, how he'd been living down by the river for years now, scavenging what he could and making do with what little he had. It wasn't much, but there was a strange sort of freedom in it, a freedom I hadn't felt in my suffocating apartment, where every shadow had become a reminder of my failure to escape. As the night went on, Ray told me about others like him, people who had drifted down to the river, looking for a place to disappear. Some stayed for a while. Others moved on. It wasn't much of a community, but there was a certain understanding among the people here. No one asked too many questions, no one pried. It was a place where you could exist without being noticed, without being haunted by the things that followed you. I could see why people stayed. For the first time in what felt like forever, I began to relax. The constant pressure of the spam ghosts, the strange visitor, the weird glitches, they all seemed to fade into the background here, by the river. Maybe it was because there was no internet, no screens, no connection to the digital world that had become my prison. Out here, I could breathe. I wasn't Ethan, the guy who couldn't escape his own mind. I was just another drifter, another nameless soul trying to find some kind of peace. Ray didn't know about the ghosts. He didn't know about the things that had crawled out of my computer and into my life, and I wasn't about to tell them. But being around him, listening to his stories, made me feel like maybe I could start over. Maybe the hauntings would stop now that I was here, away from everything. Maybe I could leave it all behind and build a new life among the forgotten. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The shadows still lingered at the edges of my vision, even here. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of something moving in the darkness, something that reminded me of the spam ghosts and the strange visitor. They weren't gone. They were just waiting, watching, biding their time. I wasn't free yet. Still, I stayed. I stayed by the river with Ray, scavenging what I could, sleeping under the stars. It wasn't much, but it was better than the life I had left behind. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could find some kind of peace out here, even if it was only temporary, even if the ghosts were still out there, waiting for their chance to drag me back.